Hello guys, today we'll be covering a 2010 psychological thriller film called Dog Pound. Davis, Angel, and Butch are the newest inmates of Enola Vale Youth Correctional Center in Montana. Davis, a 16-year-old, is arrested for drug possession, whereas the 15-year-old Angel is convicted of assault and auto theft. Likewise, the 17-year-old boy named Butch has been transferred from another institution after assaulting a correctional officer. In the correctional center, after a thorough check and handing over of their personal belongings, the boys are provided their prison uniform by the prison staff. Shortly after, Sands, the superintendent, briefs the new boys about the regulations of the facility, including the safety protocols present there. They're then placed under the authority of the unit supervisor, Goodyear, who has a reputation for being a strict yet empathetic officer. Goodyear leads the boys to their dormitory and assigns them their beds. He explains to them the types and levels of juvenile inmates. He mentions that the color and type of uniform of the inmates can help anyone identify the level the inmate is in. Basically, every single inmate starts with level 1, and based on the evaluation of their behavior during their stay, their level can be changed. If they show some improvement, they're then moved to level 2, have some privilege, and also become trustees. Now, the inmates in level 2 are in black pants and a polo shirt. However, if the inmates have poor performance and are engaged in anything harmful, they'll stand out from the group with their orange suits and will have to make a visit to special unit. In the next scene, we see Butch eating his meal. But it does not end well for him since Banks, the chief bully, puts the piping hot food on him. Right from their first encounter, Banks is hostile towards Butch for some reason. But on the brighter side, Butch is able to befriend a fellow inmate named Max. Even though Butch has a small scuffle, the boys' first night passes without any hassle. The next morning, Goodyear comes to wake all the boys up, and their day starts with mopping the prison floor. Moments later, Bank and his lackeys, Looney and Eckersley, come to bully Davis. Since they seem to be the powerful guys there, they end up forcing Davis to give Banks his new boots. And after that, while Butch is doing his task and mopping the floor, the same group of boys keeps on spitting on him from above. Unlike the previous night, Butch does not get to have a peaceful sleep. In the middle of the night, Banks and his lackeys cover Butch's mouth and also land a few hard punches on him. The next morning, as usual, the officers are there to inspect the room. But Angel disregards the officers' orders, and eventually he ends up being detained in solitary confinement. Also, Butch's bruised face does not go unnoticed by Goodyear. When he asks what happened to his face, Butch responds by saying he slipped and fell at night. Goodyear obviously doesn't believe him, and since Butch refuses to reveal the names of his assaulters, he ends up in solitary confinement as well. On the other hand, inside this juvenile center, Banks has his own ways to sneak in the drug. Meekin, a level 2 inmate, whose duty is to collect the trash during the visitation hour, sneaks in different things for other inmates. While Butch is in solitary confinement, Banks and his boys lure Davis with the drugs and mess up with him. After they leave, Davis couldn't even stand straight under the influence of drugs, so he crawls out of the room to ask for help. Outside, Goodyear notices him and drags him to the bathroom. He puts Davis in the cold shower and induces him to vomit in order to flush the drugs out of his system. Then, just like the other guys, he puts Davis in a solitary cell. Eventually, after a day or two, the boys are sent back to their dorm. A few days pass by, and the three boys are waiting for the day they can have revenge on Banks. And finally, one day, when Looney and Eckersley try to pick a fight with Davis, Angel covers the security camera, and Butch beats up Looney. He then forces the whereabouts of Banks from Eckersley. Immediately, Davis and Butch head towards the lavatory in search of Banks. Upon reaching there, Butch beats Banks to a pulp, and Davis quickly retrieves his boots from the battered bully. At the same time, Davis's mom comes to visit him. She informs him that she's planning to file a suit against the institution in regard to her son being bullied. But recently, under the protection of Butch, Davis has gained much confidence inside the center, so he mentions that he does not need his mother's unnecessary help. After Banks's incident, Butch, Davis, and Angel are living peacefully. They hang out with Max and joke around without a care in the world. However, Shadow, another powerful figure in the center, starts taking an interest in Butch. And sure enough, Butch has also noticed this. As an observant fellow, Butch knows that Meekin usually brings in the drugs for Shadow, so he approaches Meekin and asks him to bring things for him as well. When Meekin comes to give him his order, Butch ransacks him and gets his hands on Shadow's drugs as well. One day, as Butch is hanging out with his friends in the laundry room, Goodyear comes to get him and takes him to the office. There, a senior officer informs him that the authorities have investigated the officer that he had previously assaulted and found him to be guilty of physically abusing quite a number of children. And now they assume that Butch's offense was for self-defense. Therefore, if things go well, he could be released in a week or two. Nevertheless, it's only possible if, and only if, he does not get involved in any sort of misconduct within this period. Later in the afternoon, Shadow's goon attacks Meekin in the dining hall to serve as a warning for Butch for snatching his drugs. With this attack, Meekin sustains some significant injuries. Since there was the use of weapons, police start searching the dormitories. Initially, Shadow's plan was for Butch to get caught for the possession of the drug, but to his disappointment, that does not happen. Next, Butch goes to Shadow, covers his mouth with a piece of cloth, and warns him not to resort to cheap tricks of harming others to threaten him. He started gaining the upper hand in the prison power game, so before leaving, he tosses the pills to the floor. The following day is the birthday party of Goodyear's daughter. Despite his request for leave 2 weeks prior, Sands does not grant him his leave due to the increasing number of assaults in the facility. Goodyear's already annoyed with Sands, and on top of that, his wife keeps on calling him to remind him of the party. Meanwhile, the boys are doing their painting job while joking around with each other. Angel draws an inappropriate picture on the wall, and this angers Goodyear. And just then, an ill-fated incident happens between Angel and Goodyear. During their physical tussle, Goodyear throws Angel to the wall. Angel collapses on the ground, unconscious and bleeding from his head. Sands hears the commotion and asks Goodyear what this is all about, but he says nothing and just stands in silence. Butch lashes out at Goodyear for not saying what happened, and he also shows his frustration towards Sands for not reacting quickly. This leads him to be detained in solitary confinement yet once again. As soon as Looney and Eckersley witness Butch being taken away by the officers, they see the opportunity to take their revenge on Davis. Then they corner Davis and start to pour their anger and resentment towards him. But they don't stop with just physical assault, they even engage in sexual assault. After a while, Butch is released from solitary confinement and meets Davis in the dining hall. While they sit there, they both are unknown to the fact that Angel has been declared dead by the hospital. And before Davis could talk to Butch about what had happened to him, Butch tells him that he's going to be released soon, so he could not bring himself to share anything with Butch. That night, he finds it hard to even fall asleep, so he requests the officer to allow him to contact his mother. But since it's still nighttime, the officer rejects his request and tells him to make the call in the morning. His desperate call for help goes unnoticed by the officer. Feeling helpless and ashamed to be unable to face the prospect of future assaults, Davis eventually takes his life by cutting himself and bleeding to death that very night. His body is then discovered by Goodyear the next morning while he's on his rounds. Davis's death causes a riot to start inside the facility, and the inmates protest with hunger strikes. During the strike, Butch notices Looney being suspiciously nervous. While the inmates are banging on the table, Butch throws a chair on the wall, declaring the start of the rampage. Eventually, it breaks into a physical tussle between inmates and the police. In a state of total chaos, Butch pounces on Looney and starts beating him up. To control the situation, Sands barricades the dining hall initially and then orders the special unit to be mobilized. When the situation could not be stabilized with shields and batons, they had to resort to using tear gas. But even that does not seem to be effective against the mob. Therefore, they fire a few rounds of rubber bullets at the inmates. As the condition begins worsening, Max breaks down the thin wall to the kitchen and leads Butch towards the garbage room. Butch calls him to tag along, but Max refuses and returns back inside. Consequently, Butch makes his way to the exit door, and finally, after multiple tries, he pries open the door. But what awaits him behind the open door is the stretch of wire mesh fence, restricting his escape completely. The unplanned escape backfires when the officers catch Butch, and with the use of excessive force, they break his leg and drag him back inside the facility. And the movie ends.